Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Ellie Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm sitting here with Adam Klasner, founder of Anochi Workshops.
Yes, sir.
So you're the guy behind it. We've been trying to...
One of the guys
behind it. Nice. So let's talk about your backstory a little bit. How did you grow up? How did you get into this work?
Okay. So how did I grow up? If we're going to the original story of where this all started, of my passion for workshops and working on myself, I remember when I was 3 years old and I had like very severe eczema, like to the point where I was bleeding and I was always scratching myself, and it was really shameful and embarrassing to walk around with it. And I went
At 3 years old, you felt the shame and embarrassment.
Well, I only felt it in my adulthood. I went back to that experience.
Oh, understood.
Which is part of how we tap into certain unconscious or subconscious thoughts and experiences.
But your memories of it were feeling shame and...
Yeah, I went back to it and I was feeling like it was embarrassing to be around people and show them that. I remember as a kid it was more actually probably 5 and 6 that I felt that embarrassment, but I really suffered with it. And I remember coming to my mother and asking her, like, how can we fix this? Like, I don't want to have this anymore. And she said, well, we'll go to a doctor, a dermatologist. And I said, okay, and he's going to take it away forever, right? And she's like, well, no, we're going to get cream and it's going to help with it. And it was like, in that moment, I felt that something was unresolved and I didn't want to have anyone experience the pain that I had to go through. And in that moment, even though I was so young, and it was a certain program that was downloaded, was I don't want anyone to have to suffer like I had to suffer.
Right. Sometimes people make a promise to themselves or a vow saying, I never want to go through this again. I never want to feel this. You kind of took it to the whole world.
Yeah. And this wasn't like, I wasn't conscious when I was 3 years old going through this experience. It's something through the work that I've been doing in search of more of myself that I could access this. I could find this. I've had tools to go back into life experience and see where did I get all these programs that I have today in my life from? Mm-hmm. How I show up, how I interact with the world, and so on and so forth.
Got it. So that was one of the...
So that was one
key realization.
That was my key realization. And then as I was going, I didn't grow up in a frum household. I didn't grow up in a religious household. We grew up very traditional. My parents were into the practice, but we went to a conservative shul and we used to drive on Shabbos. And I remember I wasn't satisfied with this. I wanted more. And so I said to my father, like, because we were learning in school about, what Shabbos is, I want to be able to walk to shul on Shabbos, because that's what I learned you're supposed to do. And he's like, well, you can walk, even though we lived like 2.5 hours away from the closest shul from us. And I was always
What was your introduction to, where was that coming from, the knowledge about Judaism?
Sorry?
There was a Hebrew school you were going to?
Yeah, I was going to a Hebrew school, and anything I learned was sort of like imprinted. So it was like, okay, you're supposed to pray 3 times a day, or you're supposed to, this is how you keep Shabbat or whatever. And I took it to heart, and I was like, okay, I want to make a movement in that direction.
Right.
And I was sort of let down because I wanted that mentor that would just show me how to do this rather than me having to do this. And I was a young kid. What am I going to do already?
Right.
So, one thing led to the next thing, and then really where I got really deep into having to see myself was when I was faced with my first experience of death, where I had to watch people close to me die. And that's where things became very real for me, and I had to sort of almost figure out myself. But
what age? Who are we talking about?
Yeah, so my Zaidi, my grandfather, he passed away when I was 16, 17, around that age. And he was like my mentor in that sense, the person that I was looking to for a lot of guidance. But the exact opposite happened. I became less conscious. I wanted to disconnect from the world. When he passed away, it wasn't it wasn't about how can we work on this, how can we talk about this. Everyone sort of separated on their own paths. And so I became very unconscious in my life and figuring out my own path, but just looking how to escape that pain of the harshness of losing someone that I loved.
Right. So a pivotal moment, and the people around you didn't have any better tools to deal with it than you did. So everyone kind of went off in their own
which has
direction.
been a theme. This has been a theme of my life. Death surrounds my life. Death has surrounded my life, and just we have this family unit. It's hard to like face it together. We're all like go off on our own. And that's all these things have led me to a certain point, and then when I was in Israel, when I was 21 years old, I was learning in Aisha Torah that I went on this.
Before you go there, when you say you became unconscious, so how did you deal with it practically? What did it look like? If I saw you, did you involve yourself in sports? Were you hitting on girls? Like, what was
so I
thing you threw yourself
was
into?
looking to almost like find a new family, make sure that I had friends. So I would sleep over at my friend's house a lot, a good friend of mine, trying to figure out the girls, and got into drinking habits. Nothing that I would consider myself an addict, but I would want to lose myself.
Right.
And that led me to hang around with different people.
So in the process of losing your grandfather, you lost your family also.
Yeah, exactly. In a certain sense. And it's hard to say that because I really had such a supportive family growing up. Like, I had parents that were always there for me, but when it came about being vulnerable and talking about the real things of life, it was too tough. It was too much to face.
Right. I think this is it's a similar theme that I hear, a lot of. I think that, like, how old are you now?
I'm 39.
39, right? So I'm 38. So I think, like, our age, we have a certain luxury to deal with a certain kind of problems that our parents didn't. And
yeah, you could call it a luxury.
Yeah, in some sense, I was thinking about it. I don't know when this will be aired, but the attacks in Israel just happened a few days ago, a few days before recording this, and it made me think about, like, living in that state, how little pull there would be to do this kind of healing work. It feels so extra, almost, do healing. Not where I am now, because now it's synonymous with life, but I felt kind of what it must have felt like 40, 50 years ago, when people were much more focused on survival every day, not just this weekend experience, and how distant something like this would feel. In any case, the theme I was connecting it to was this idea of someone going through, like, a very intense experience in their life, and the people around them, whether it's teachers or the schooling or even religion itself, whatever it is, that environment can't actually contain that peak experience for them, that the intensity of those emotions. And there could be a lot of support in a practical way, but if that thing is not addressed, then the person that leaves unsupported.
Yeah, and then you're forced to detach or to make a fake reality.
Right, or try to find it somewhere else, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I would be making, in a certain sense, that detachment or the fake reality that I can get this somewhere else. When in reality, is what I really need is I need that family unit, the place that I came from. I need to be able to go home and experience home as it should be.
Right.
And when it's not there, so I gotta go and search for it somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, it almost feels like, I don't know if this is true to you, but I'm thinking when I was going through certain teenage experiences, and even though I didn't have the words for it, there was a lot of trauma that I was carrying from, let's say, going through several years of sexual abuse and just feeling in general lonely and anxious and afraid. And maybe it didn't show up that way, right? I was into sports and I had friends and everything else, but inside there was all of that, and it didn't feel like anyone can handle it. And it didn't feel like religion or the religious environment could handle what I was going through. So it felt irrelevant, essentially. It's like, okay, you're teaching me all these things, you're communicating all this support to me in whatever way you know how, but it has nothing to do with me, because what I need to deal with, you can't handle.
Right.
Okay, go on.
So
you say you're up to 21.
So I was up to 21. That's where, that was like one of the pivotal moments, is like I was about to face death again. My bubby at that point, my Zaidi from my father's side, he passed away at 16, and then my bubby from my mother's side, and them two were like almost like the parent figures. Like they just showered me with love, tons of love, and what they represented was everything for me in a certain sense. So she got a stroke. I was in Israel. I was on this Aisha Torah program, and everyone's like, "You go into Aisha Torah, don't get brainwashed to become religious." And I sort of checked out. I wasn't really involved in the program. I just want to be in Israel because I had been there. I'd done in the previous summer Magen David Adom. I was there, like going down that path of wanting to be a doctor, which is going back to 3. I wanted to be that doctor that can cure all illnesses. That was like my passion that led me all the way to that point. And I was out New Year's night in Israel. They call it Sylvester. And my brother calls me up and he's like, Bobby had a stroke. And I just I dropped into this state of fear and sadness and don't know what's going to be. And I became very desperate to find something that I could connect to. And so because I was in Aisha Torah and I was right there, I happened to have a valuable resource, a guy named Daniel Katz. Today he does that.
Rav Daniel.
Yeah.
Cool.
He was there at the time.
Oh, neat.
And we learned 3 hours a day. He gave me the time, and
beautiful.
We learned one-on-one.
Okay, shout out to Rav Daniel.
What? Yeah.
That's a shout out to Rav Daniel.
Shout out to him. And
he and I did had some discussions early on, but now I only like doing things in person. So
right.
Unless I'm in Israel or Daniel's here.
One day.
Yeah.
One day
we'll see if he wants to have conversations with me again. I'm not sure.
If he watches this now, he's going to. And so he really helped me along the path. But I remember I went down to the Kotel, and I was like crying my eyes out. I needed direction. I needed something. And this guy tapped on my back and he said, "Do you want to put on tefillin?" And I said, "Okay." It was a Chabad guy. Okay. And I was like, "Can you say a Misha Berach for my bubby? Can you put a good word, a good blessing out there for her?" And he says, "Sure, I'll do that. But you put on tefillin." And I said, "Can you do it for a week?" He said, "Put on tefillin for a week." And I said, "Come on, that's."
Well, you were in Aisha Torah, but you were not.
I was not observant at all. Like, meaning I took my tefillin with me. I had them with me. I always took them wherever I went. It's just that connection I felt. But I really think that from 16, when I experienced that death, it was like there was that disconnection. I didn't really want that. I wanted just to experience having a comfortable, good experience of life.
So you were learning with Rav Daniel 3 hours a day, but you weren't putting on tefillin?
No, that was after.
Okay.
That was after the stroke, and then tefillin and the Daniel, Rav Daniel all came together, and he said, "Just put it on, and same time it takes to make a cup of coffee, put on tefillin." I was like, "What? I don't have to say the whole prayer?" I didn't know. You just say the Shema. So he says, "Yeah." So I put it on, and I haven't missed a day since.
Oh, beautiful.
And that became that journey. She ended up surviving for 2 more years.
This whole tefillin campaign was launched after a war in Israel. I think in 1967 war, 1973. Yeah. The Rebbe had many things he added, but tefillin one specifically was related to war.
Absolutely. It's almost like, and I've done some like breathwork experiences or other experiences where tefillin keeps on coming up. It's like my mitzvah. I'm very connected. Like I've never felt like I could even skip a day or forget to put it on, even if like at a rush morning or something happened. It's just like, it's been my thing. So other things have maybe been compromised, but this has been one of the strongest connections that I have. It's like that moment that I was at the Kotel where I had it and the guy taps on my back. And it's just, I felt like I needed in my life. It was like a sign directly from God. And so I, went down that path. I went back to university and I connected with my rabbi from there, Chabad rabbi from there, and he guided me along the path. I went to Chabad Yeshiva in Morristown and was on my way. And then life hit my next pivotal point where I wanted to go back to yeshiva the next year, and I came home. I came home in the middle. My bubby actually passed away that year. I was 23, so it was 2 years later. She passed away, and then it was a very difficult time. I went back to yeshiva again, faced with death, and sort of disconnected, didn't want to face it. And I also found out while I was in yeshiva that my mother got cancer. Oh, wow. And it was a very long battle for her. She passed away 4.5 years ago, but that put me into a state of fear, which doubled me down on learning and davening, whatever, just disconnecting, not really allowing myself to feel those emotions because it's too intense for me to handle. I never had a way to
Disconnecting
process.
through learning and davening.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
And I felt very connected to the learning and davening, but disconnected from myself and trying to escape, trying to find a safe haven. And God was my safe haven.
But I think it's important we sit on this because I don't know that enough is said about it. Like the importance sometimes of intention, right? Sometimes the way I was taught felt like, okay, the action is everything, but we can disconnect through the intention is more than the intention behind our own personal actions. I'm not talking about the global world, right? When you feed someone, you fed them and they don't care about your intention. They just care about the food. But when our own personal actions, so you're saying like you disconnected through prayer and learning.
Yeah, and what's
Davening,
funny
learning.
is I was searching for connection, but I was disconnected from my own pain. I was disconnected from my own traumatic experiences that weren't allowing me to like face it in the human experience, which is, you know, that blockage where I don't process my emotions, and therefore I'm just searching for a new existence or searching for a new way that I can hide out in and hope that I feel better about my life or feel more comfortable.
Right. And in some way, religion offered that. I'm thinking of a, I'm sure Gabor Mate, who he was well known for treating addicts. And then afterwards, when he interacted with ayahuasca, then he became a major proponent of ayahuasca. So someone asked him, how are you, aren't you replacing one drug for another? And he said, no, it's all about the set and setting, or another way of saying it, it's all about your intention going in. He said, when an addict is taking heroin or cocaine, what's their motive? What's their intention is to disconnect from their reality.
Right.
When someone is drinking ayahuasca or mushrooms, and it's not necessarily about the substance, it can be done, the same substance can be used in a different way. Maybe not ayahuasca, but certainly mushrooms could be used in a form of connection or disconnection. And that was his point, is that it's not a drug when it's used for connection. And I would say the reverse is true here. When you're using something as holy as it is, it's prayer, it's learning and everything else, but it's being used as a form of disconnection, not as a form of connection, it runs the same risk as other things.
It's hard for me to admit this, and I have to almost tell myself that really you didn't have the most authentic connection. Like deep when I was a kid and I wanted that, in search to find more of this Judaism that I'm being taught, that I'm going to school with. I want more of that. It's like now I'm like using it as a safe haven. I'm trying to find a place where I can escape because the pain's too much and I feel good there. I feel really good there.
So what's the hard part to say? You were saying it's hard for you to admit that?
Well, to say that my relationship with God at the beginning was fake.
It was a relationship with yourself, not a relationship with God.
Place, but at the same time, that's all I knew. That's the level of consciousness that I had, and it's almost like I was guided there, and that was my outlet. That was my thing that I fell into.
Yeah, I'm not looking to put it down because
no.
As far as options are, it's probably a safer disconnection than heroin. I'm not
probably.
I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying that like when you said it, it hit me. Someone can be using these tools for disconnection, and someone who's on the other side of that, recognizing a child who's using it for disconnection, can point it out. It's like, okay, it's wonderful that you're steeped in religion, but this is not connecting you. This is disconnecting you.
Yeah, I mean, in the end of the day, you know, the Jewish thought is, you know, how do you say? I don't know how you say it in English, but it's like from a place of unconsciousness, I will come to a place of consciously doing this, where I have that intention. So if I believe this is the right path, I believed it, I just wasn't connecting the way that I really felt this is, because I had a blockage. I had a major blockage of that feeling towards it, rather than it, you know, saying that I've worked through my stuff. I really found God. But in this situation, I found God out of a place of desperation.
Right. So let's talk about that. Take us through that journey, because it certainly doesn't look like it took you away from the practice of it. Like you said, tefillin has a special place in your heart and you feel deeply connected to the mitzvahs. But today it sounds like it's not coming from a place of disconnection. It's coming from a place of, it's not running away, it's running towards.
Yeah. So I definitely am running towards. It's been a journey from with all of this, which, you know, I can fast forward a bit.
No, don't fast forward at all.
Or just so I was at 22. I just finished a year of yeshiva, and then in Morristown, New Jersey, and then I went to work in this dental company because I wanted to make some money because I wanted to go back to yeshiva. My parents were really eager for me to finish, or go back to school or something, or do something with my university degree.
So at this point, your travels took you to Chabad.
Yeah.
Got it.
So I went there. I came out. Some guy offered me a summer job. I ended up meeting this guy there who was a Chabad guy, and we were getting along. And he came to me and he said, I have this guy. I have this sister-in-law that first a guy came up and someone told me about it, and I introduced it to him in yeshiva about this girl, and she had 2 kids, and he was an older bacher in the yeshiva that I was in, and then I sort of introduced the idea to him. That it came up while I was still in yeshiva, and then when I came out of yeshiva, it's just happened that that guy rejected that offering, and then it came up for me, and I was like, I'm a 24-year-old kid. Why am I getting offered this woman with 2 kids? But my brother-in-law now, this would eventually be my wife, just thought it was a good match. So he brought it up, and something inside me said, I have to go meet this girl. But I was extremely afraid because how am I going to present this to my parents? So like, I become Chabad. Then I go and I start telling my parents, hey, I want to date this woman with 2 kids, which just sounds ludicrous. And so I asked all these rabbis, and they all gave me mixed opinions. But one rabbi who actually knew her said, you should actually go for it. And here's the plan. You're going to go date her for 2 dates. And if it's nothing, you don't have to tell your parents. But if it becomes something, then you introduce it to your parents. And that whole idea backfired because my parents were super triggered by that. And they got super triggered about how the Chabad movement was showing up. And they thought they were manipulating me and so on and so forth. So that became an interesting experience. But I was dead set on, after the second date, I wanted to marry this girl. I felt so strongly connected. I can't even tell you what it was. And I felt like this is my purpose, like right here with her. And so I introduced it. My parents pushed back a lot, but they sort of let me do my own thing, hoping that it would end. And later on, I met the kids. She had 2 kids. So her first husband passed away, got hit by a train, unfortunately. And she had one child who was 1.5 and another child who wasn't born yet. So
At the time of the death, not
at the time of the death. And then a couple of years later, so
this is what you mean, your life surrounded by death. Okay, so
I just keep attracting it. So it's almost like I need to face this thing that's surrounding me. So we ended up getting engaged and getting married. I met the kids after a number of dates. I made sure that I made a number of dates before I met the kids because I didn't want to be influenced by feeling anything for the kids. I wanted to make sure my connection was with my wife first, or who I was dating first. And then when I met the kids, it was just like they were the sweetest kids. Like it just almost like sealed the deal. It's like, even though I had made the decision sort of that I wanted to do, but I was afraid. I was very afraid. I didn't know what to do. Went through with it, and we got married. And then I was like fully given over, and then she was just not there. She had no capacity to be there. It's like she went through her stuff and her therapy and whatever she had to go through to get to a place where she felt that she wanted to move forward, but you can't know until you experience it of what's going to come up as you're experiencing it. So it's a lot of stuff from the past came up for her, but I wasn't aware of any of this. There's no communication about it because she felt like she didn't want to hurt me. So I was married to this woman who just no connection.
Right, the amount of pain we cause people in the name of not hurting them.
Yeah, tell me about it. And then we had a child together. That was my first daughter, and named her after my bubby that had the stroke. It was like full cycle. And we had another kid, and I was just working and trying to and what ended up happening, so they were a Chabad house shluchim. They were for like young adults. They were
They
helping out
meaning you.
my wife and her previous husband.
Got it. Understood.
They were working in a community. So what I did was, I was like, okay, I'm gonna, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life, but I thought maybe I'll be a Chabad shliach or whatever. I was like, I just stepped into his shoes now, or tried to step into his shoes. So two things I try to do, which end up becoming very dangerous, not dangerous in a sense like it's someone's life is at risk, but it's dangerous to take on someone else's energy. It's dangerous to step in someone else's shoes where you don't belong, because you feel out of place, and it's like everyone else feels like that's not your place. It's not a spoken thing, but it's known. So I jumped into being that same role where we were like doing young adult events, but I knew there was like a disconnection. Like she didn't feel it. I was feeling it more. I wanted it more. And then in terms of showing up to these two kids, it was like, well, what do you call me? You can't call me Tati, because Tati would be competing with the Tati that they had. And, I sort of don't want to compete with that, but I want to give them the most normal life possible. Like it's the most, like, I don't want them to feel that void anymore. So in wanting the right thing, I ended up doing it the wrong way. I don't want them to feel the void. So it's almost like I took that role and replaced him. No pictures of him in the house, no real mention, only on days, like important days like a birthday and whatever, but I wasn't really a part of that. On the yurt site, they went to the graveside, and I wasn't a part of that. And it was too hard for me to really see that, because I felt that competition. I felt like this competition is what's causing me not to be able to have an authentic relationship with my wife. I can't.
So the competition from your wife or from your kids?
No, it was more from my wife in the previous relationship. But any power that I gave to that relationship. So even the last name, I wanted that, and we went to therapy to figure out like what last name we should go with, my last name or his last name, and the therapist suggested that we switch to my last name to have like a family unit. And then eventually, at a certain point in time, you'll discuss it with them. You'll have an open conversation. Gets to that point, but it was almost like because of that, I ended up excluding him. It's like he was like really not a part of this household, and which is not fair to them, because that was their father. But I was trying to do it from a place of like, I want to be here I don't want you to feel like you don't have a father. I don't want you to feel that pain. Right. And I was just trying. I was like running around trying to do this, and everything I was doing was just causing more pain and disconnection between me and my wife. And I was building up to a certain point where I was like, I just need to focus. My escape then became not learning and whatever anymore. It became working. I need to work. I need to make money. So I left the whole shluchas stuff and went and was sort of doing it part-time, but didn't really feel connected. And I went into financial advice, or my father suggested that. I went into it. He helped me with connections. I got a job, and I was working nonstop. And and I was worried that I wasn't really going to make it in work. So I had a lot of anxiety and fear about what's going to be. So I went to a doctor, because I thought like I can't focus. I need to take
looking for some medication or something.
I was looking to be diagnosed with ADHD and get some medications. So I went to this neurologist, bless you.
Excuse me. Thank you.
And he prescribed me to a Vyvanse, which is some ADHD drug, and I could focus, but I was almost like too focused. And I was so focused on that, everything became about business. Everything. I left early in the morning. I came back at night. My kids didn't see me. My wife saw me only for a little bit, but I was on this drug. I wasn't even telling her that I was taking this the Vyvanse, and I felt very disconnected emotionally, very disconnected from anything but what the focus was, business. And then I was like, things aren't moving fast enough, and I'm struggling in business. So I went back to the doctor. He subscribed me to an antidepressant. So now I'm antidepressant.
And the anti-anxiety, or
and not the anti-anxiety. I never took anti-anxiety.
I mean the ADHD.
The ADHD,
Yeah.
and then
You were taking both.
I was taking both. I went back to him a third time, and because still wasn't moving fast enough, and he put me on this like trial drug. I don't even remember what it was, like Intuit or something, whatever it was called. And at that point, I was like losing a lot of weight and so disconnected from myself, like extremely, like, yeah, I have a beard right now. You see this, and I had a beard back then also, and you could see my cheekbone in my beard. Like it was like I lost like I was probably like 150. I'm now like 175. It's like a lot of weight for me to lose. So it was noticeable. Wasn't eating, just no emotion, and there was some talk about this workshop that was going on in the Chabad world, or it was, getting traction in the Chabad world. So I had like all these like missionaries that came to me, and it's like, oh, you got to go on this workshop. I'm like, listen, buddy, to my friends, I don't got to go in any workshop. You had a messed up childhood. I know about your childhood. I had a good childhood. Things were good for me. I don't need your workshop. I got this. I felt like, there was a strong wall between really seeing what was going on and enough pressure. I had a good friend, so my brother-in-law is Nachman Forer. He's my partner in the workshops now. So his brother, Menachem Forer, and it's like that Forer family is like, and some other guys, some of the Mogilevskis, came to me and they pushed me hard. You got to do this. So he called me up one day. He's like, I'm taking your credit card right now. I'm signing you up and you're going on this workshop. And there's a lot of pressure at work because I was working for somebody else. At the time, I had no money. Not only did I have no money, I was making like $60,000 a year. Nobody knew that I had like also $150,000 of debt that I took on as against my house, and I maxed it out. Like that was it. I didn't have this room to go and do that. I just had my fifth kid, combined with the other two, and it's like, you're going. And so I went to my boss and I was like, can I take a day off for the Friday, go to Jersey? He's like, no. Ended up taking off the day anyways, called in as a sick day, and just went to that workshop. And everything from that point on became possible. That was the moment of possibility for everything in my life. That was like the opening that I was long awaiting for. It was like that moment in time that changed the rest of my life.
The workshop at the time you went to is called
the Shofar. And so I go to this workshop. There's some famous people out in the world, which I will not mention, that were there on that workshop with me. It's a nice crowd, and the program was getting a lot of traction. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like, this is unbelievable. We got to do this in Toronto. I want to make a Call the Shofar workshop in Toronto. I have a cabin up north. Let's go. And so we started getting things together, and I reached out to one of the facilitators there named Mo Sroor, and me and my brother-in-law were talking about it, and we're like, okay, we got to do this. So the three of us came together, and we just put this thing together. At that time, the world was coming heavy down on it, and
the Chabad world.
The Chabad world was coming heavy down on this program and saying, they came up with all sorts of petitions against the program.
What do you think their issue was with it?
That's a good question. So their issues were that they didn't have a control over it. They didn't have a handle over it. And in Chabad, they really do have a strong method of what they teach and how they approach things. But this, from within the system, there's a lot of control about anything new. Their mistake, in my opinion, if I'm putting it out there, which it wasn't a mistake in the end of the day, because here we are today after that was shut down, whatever else happened, but was take this program that everyone's going to and learn to embrace it. Like, learn to work with it. Why do you got to smash it down and make it into nothing? People are going to it. You'll never be able to get people to subscribe to you and what you're offering if you're hurting something that's dear to them. So work with what they're working with. And then the repercussion was a lot of people got turned off Chabad, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it for years. And it was such a
the issue
tragedy.
I had with it at the time, the response was that I didn't know anything about your workshop. You know, for all I know, there was a golden calf in the middle of it, right? So maybe there was something wrong. I wasn't coming from whether it was right or wrong. I was coming from there was a clear need that was being met through this, or at the very least, deep desire, but most likely a clear need that was being met. And if there's an issue with it, okay, by all means, right? If you think there's an issue, if it's incompatible with your way of life and your religion for some reason, okay, so say this is off limits, but then replace it, meaning don't ignore the need that this showed you existed, right? You wouldn't take a starving person who's eating pork and then say, you can't eat pork, done, and then what do you think is going to happen? Give him food, give him something else. There was something that was missing very clearly, and I was feeling that, and I'm seeing like, hey, people are talking about this workshop. I didn't attend, but people were talking very positively about it. I only heard about it in the negative, meaning I heard about it because of the criticism. But at the time, it was very clear to me that a lot of people were drawn to this in a very powerful way, and just to throw it out and not replace it with anything, not offer some alternative, not say how we're going to address the lack seemed to be a huge miss.
100%. And the people that had went on my workshop or other people that had attended were very powerful people, some within Chabad. And they had an opportunity to stand up and to share and to put it out there. And I was so let down with the backing. And, you know, people were saying, and I even spoke to them privately, and they're saying, you know, what can we do? We're going up against the Beis Din over here. Like, and they didn't feel confident in really promoting it or backing it. And
Right.
people were losing their jobs at the time because they had gone to that workshop. Like there were some Rebbes that were fired from the yeshivas. I think it was only temporary in the end of the day, but because they had gone on this workshop. I was like, there's so much resistance to it. And I felt like it just wasn't being understood. So they took the owner of this workshop and they grilled him, and they didn't like his answers. And I think if I could validate their side.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Because it's important. I think.
Yeah, where were they coming from? What were they finding?
So where they were coming from was, you know, this is a religious-based program. And the guy at the top had a different approach to religion. You know, they asked him certain questions and they were grilling him on his approach to religion. And because they didn't like the answers, it's like, do you daven 3 times a day, let's say? And he's like, well, when I feel like it, let's say. That was one of his answers. Right. Or talking about Mashiach, what does that mean? And he would say it's a concept rather than a person. Like he had his views. Right. Which weren't based on necessarily a Torah way, and it seemed his answers seemed very threatening to the approach, because there were people that decided to drop religion as a result of experiencing this program. And that was the last thing I wanted, and thought that should be, it's like when you go into this and you open up and you remove some of those blockages that you've been holding on to, everything becomes more authentic and more real. But because of that heavy resistance, so it became like I'm fighting for this work, and now I became less connected to Chabad as a result of that.
What do you make of people who become less connected, or who became less connected? And I'm sure it possibly still happens within workshops. I see it all the time. People embark on their healing journey, and they become less religious. You know, I'm comfortable saying the word less religious because I think religion's a bad word. So they become less religious.
Yeah. So let's put it this way. Let me keep on talking about the journey. I'm going to get back to that question, because I'm going to answer this question based on how it all went down. So we're doing the workshop. We decided to do it in Toronto. We put it out there. It's coming in January. Happened to be like a crazy snowstorm, which was in itself funny. And we're at 10 participants, and slowly they start dropping off, and like nobody's interested. And finally, scrapped up 6 people that we were able to get.
How large were your largest workshops before that?
No, that was the first One, meaning
No,
I
I'm
went on
s-
a workshop.
Call the chauffeur when they were having workshops. How large were
I see what you're saying. So the one that I went on, I think there were 30 some odd participants, 33 participants maybe. I can't even remember.
Right.
Back in the day, they used to do everything through email, so I have to go back to my emails. But now you can see like on a workshop because you're on a WhatsApp chat together. So 6 people, an intimate thing. We only had 17 beds anyways. I went up there. I remember I went up there with my father. We went to the cabin and we built bunk beds together in order to set up. He was like supporting me in this whole process. It was very nice. And we got 6 people. And no one wanted to do it after that. It was sort of like fizzled away. And my wife was questioning the whole thing, like, because she was scared. She was scared that I had been brainwashed, and everyone was putting out things, oh, the people that go on that are brainwashed, and they drop religion and this and that. It was a heavy resistance, so I had to like almost defend myself. And it was very tough. It was a very tough time. I finally found something, and now I feel like I could. And I had very powerful moments with my wife before the whole thing got shut down, because you do these practices after, like certain letters that you read or own and take responsibility for. And there was moments like deep connection and crying between the two of us. We were at this like burger joint after, and I read her this letter, and she's eating a burger, and I'm like crying, and she's crying. and then she started questioning because she was scared. So we said, no, we're not letting this happen. And I went to my Rav in Toronto. Which today he needs a refuah shlema, Rav David Shochat, and
Amen.
I wanted to work with making this program legitimate, so to speak, and figure it out. And so we worked on a lot of the curriculum and the workshop stuff to sharpen it, make it better. And he would never give also a stamp that this is okay, because he was also at risk. And he said, I've never been on this workshop. If somebody comes in and asks me to go on this workshop and I'm their Rav, I would maybe tell them to go on the workshop because I'm their Rav and I know what they need. I know how much pain they're in because they open up to me, and so on and so forth. But he's not like putting his stamp of approval for everyone.
Right.
I think that was really responsible how he did it, and he was putting a lot of trust and faith in us, which was amazing. And the following year we opened up as Journey to Home, and we did our first workshop, and we got, I think it was 8 guys.
Was there a particular maybe, I don't know, element of a workshop or some technique that was in Call the Chauffeur that was removed when you went to Journey to Home?
It's a good question. I think when I look at it, what was really the issue was, and it sounds really bad to say, but it's where the information is coming from, who it is coming from. So how connected are you to the message that you're giving over? So you can be giving over a message through the filter of a guy who's not necessarily following the program of the basic idea of what it means to be a religious Jew. And if it's not coming from him, so his twist comes into the program. There weren't anything that I would say was removed besides some, they had these processes where you're looking eye to eye and you're touching faces. Like, it's a pretty intimate moment, which they had bashed when they were bashing the program, of like putting you in a very vulnerable state, and it's too vulnerable that it's almost like it takes your mind to a place of you have to believe in this program because you got so vulnerable. You go so vulnerable, you get so deep, you have to believe in it, because it's almost like now you're stuck to having to believe because you just did something very weird. So they took out some of these, like a little bit of those shady things. We cleaned it up in terms
It's a strong word, shady, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. Shady just means there's not so much light on it to see how this really should be effective.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say it was necessarily something bad, but the message again was coming from a guy who was saying that, and this is what he was asked: is it better to keep Shabbos or to feel good about yourself? Similar to that question, and it's better to keep Shabbos from a place of I feel good about this connection, which the message, like you were talking about before, intention is very important. But the action is the main thing, and we can't focus on the fact that when God gave us the Torah, it's like these are the mitzvahs. We don't compromise those mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are the mitzvahs, and we need to keep the mitzvahs. So if I'm not feeling it, all I got to do is catch up to the message. I don't push away the message. And I'm not saying that he was right or wrong or however he lived his life, but if the Chabad world is seeing the Chabad movement going to this program, they're worried that things like this can happen. You're just going to start dropping things. And what ended up happening is we brought more of that Jewish flavor to it, more of the message, a pure, connected to Torah message into this program.
Understood.
And it's been a journey from Journey to Home all the way to Anochi, where it's like it became even more downloadable. Like we really need to give over that it ultimately is getting closer to God, even though we're not necessarily saying it, because I don't want to influence someone's connection to God. I want it to be everyone's own journey of their own soul to come to that. But the real problem that they had with it was the instability which they thought of the person. And that's why they grilled him. They couldn't really grill the program, and they talked about some things that they thought were questionable and followed different practices of different religions. And so we launched Journey to Home. We got a lot of pushback as well because it was based on a program, and at that time workshops weren't the flavor of the month because of all the negativity and the resistance. So we ended up getting into the Hasidic world instead of the Chabad world.
Right.
That's where things just led. There was one guy, he came, he was very influential, and he pushed people to come, and then it just exploded, literally exploded. And we started filling up workshops, and things started moving. And in the process for myself, I ended up, because I was doing this workshop, having to meet more of myself, having to do more work on myself, because my belief is and based on how the first program was shut down, is if you got to really do serious work on yourself and be able to see yourself and acknowledge who you are and how you show up, and give that message over so people hear it. It's not a concept. This is a guy doing work on himself, to the degree of which I knew to do work on myself. And at certain points, I had to face it more and more, how deep I needed to go, how much work I needed to do in order to get to the place where I thought, this is me. And then you meet a deeper layer of yourself. You face trauma, or you face different things, and you meet deeper layers. So that ended up perpetuating into this massive following that we had. But I still wasn't feeling full, like this is it. And at the time I was balancing two businesses. I was in a financial business, and I stayed
The
with
workshops.
that. I ended up actually leaving the place that I worked at, and the courage to go out and leave and start my own thing. And
That came from the workshops.
that came from the workshops. All this confidence ended up paying off all my debt within 1 year. I hit like these targets and bonuses that I was on steroids, and without the drugs, I dropped all the drugs that I was taking before, left all of it. And because I was on those drugs, I wasn't feeling. I realized how disconnected I was, and then feelings just started flowing, just started moving through me. And life became rich. It became more experiential. Like I'm experiencing life rather than going through the motions. I felt a lot like I was really just going through the motions of, this is what I'm supposed to do. Don't talk to anybody about your pain. You're married to this woman. You got 2 adopted kids, and I really treat them as my own. And I got all these kids popping out, and today we have 9 kids, Baruch Hashem.
Oh, beautiful.
And it's just, life became richer. And then as life became richer and I was experiencing more of myself, more challenges came in my life. My mother got sick, and she ended up passing away like 4.5 years ago. And that took me on a serious spin, because she was everything. She was the divine feminine figure that was just there for you. She was just there, although she wasn't vulnerable, which is what I really needed in my life, from her, from my father. And I became disconnected, and I was just going through the motions. I had to say Kaddish for a whole year, and my relationship to God took a back seat again. I was doing everything. I was always connected to doing those things, but I didn't feel it.
Through your journey, the practice of Judaism stayed throughout, right?
Practice was there. Made certain changes about the way I dressed, because I started wearing black and white, and I was going through that process of thinking that I only need to wear black and white, which has a lot to do with thinking that I need to be like my wife's first husband. So I felt the competition of being this hardcore Chabad Hasidic guy, where I would, am the shaliach figure, and I'm going out there, and this is who I am. And so some of those things, I took a deeper look at them and gravitated more towards expressing myself, who I was before. And it's been a process of strengthening more of those connections throughout those past number of years. But I had a strong resistance to Chabad because of what happened, because of what went down. It just felt like it was so wrong. It was so hurtful.
Yeah, I experienced kind of like a second wind of Call the Shofar when I was involved with Mic Drop, because many people interpret it as like the same. Like the references I got very often was, oh, it's a cult, just like Call the Shofar and stuff like that. So I felt some of the tailwinds of what it certainly wasn't as intense, but I felt some of what you're talking about. It's unpleasant.
Right,
It's particularly
and
unpleasant.
it was so secretive. I remember, and today, someone comes in a workshop, we say who is here and what is shared is totally confidential, because people don't necessarily want you to know that they're going to a workshop. That was like 10 years ago. It was a real secret. It was like a trade secret. You can't let someone know, like, in your community, and this insular communities are like very much controlling, especially in the Hasidic world. Like, they could come at you and try to burn you to the ground if they find out that you're doing something that would challenge their way of showing up. And just like the healing needs to be done, so we keep it secret. Today, it's a more normalized thing. Like, today, if you have a therapist, you're not normal. 10 years ago, if you had a therapist, you're not normal.
Right. Today, if you don't have a therapist, you're not
Yeah,
normal.
right. You're not normal for if you don't have a therapist. So,
Right.
so it's become more widespread, and the message is becoming clear that people really need help. And medicating is not help. It's a temporary Band-Aid, and necessary for people. But really, there's something
Most often
deeper.
it's not. We can say it clearly. Most often when
Yeah.
it's used, it's not necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I subscribe to Gabor Mate, and he'll tell you that but he's into medication, but it's not a long-term solution.
Yeah.
If I have anxiety, why would I take anti-anxiety? Well, because I want to block out the name of the medication. Anti-anxiety is like I'm working against it. Well, let's talk about why it's there to begin with.
Right. Yeah, oftentimes the symptom is the cure, right? Meaning, if our body heats up and we develop a fever, the problem is not our fever. The problem is the infection, and our body is heating up to fight the infection. So we reduce the fever, but if we don't deal with the infection, sometimes we need to. The body's getting too hot. Okay, so we reduce the fever, but not without. We use that opportunity to address the infection, not to pretend that the problem is the fever, not what the fever is responding to.
And the world's message is, I want the world to look a certain way. That's most of the vibration of the world. And you saw it with COVID also. It's like how many people got vaccinated and didn't know the repercussions of what's going to happen with how it's going to turn out, because they're being told, like, this is the solution. They're trusting. And that medical system, which I experienced from my own mother, like, chemotherapy was not effective. And radiation was not effective. That's actually how she passed away. I can't say it's because of the radiation. You can't escape fate. Let's just be clear. You can't escape fate. And I have no regrets on that. But what life said was, okay, she has to have 10 days of radiation because she just got a brain tumor. She got a bunch of brain tumors. And the 10th day was Monday. Wednesday, she passed away. So it's like, what were we doing over here? And I saw her deteriorating, and it's a very ineffective process from the track record of it. Not putting it down that it doesn't, prolong the person's life, but it's not actually curing the disease. It's killing all the cells around in order to create an environment where maybe new healthy cells can grow back. But I watched her deteriorate, watched that process.
Right.
And then you watch that just on the basic level of people with anxiety, and they take these pills, and I'm talking from experience because I took antidepressants. There is no emotion there. So
There's no emotion.
no emotion.
Yeah, it just knocks out the emotion.
So I have no emotion. Okay, well, there's an effect of that. I live a less authentic life.
Right, you're living in a bubble.
Because the emotions are the mirror of my soul. That's what they are. It's a communication. It's a pre-verbal communication. It's a communication without any words. It's the most primal part of us. When a baby is a baby, that's the way they communicate, through emotions. They don't talk.
Mm-hmm.
So if I lose touch with that, I lose touch with my human experience. And
I've seen it a lot, and I can tell you in my own journey the amount of times medication was recommended to me, and I had an association. I'm not sure where it developed, that this is the last resort. It was even further than a last resort. This is, I go into this, it's a prison. That's, for whatever reason, I had that association, and anytime it was recommended to me for any reason, just like anything else, I'll try everything else before I go there. Is there anything else I can do? And the fact of the matter is I got to the place I was trying to get to without medication, and it was recommended to me many times. But not only was it recommended to me, it was the ease that it was recommended to me with. It wasn't after extensive evaluations. It wasn't after trying other things and saying, okay, if the other stuff doesn't work. And the fact that we've arrived at a place that someone can more comfortably opt into a medication than breathe. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's really, you talk about the level of programming that we've like that has happened to us. It's, you know, I go to acupuncture, for example, and I have very good, not with all acupuncturists, but there's one that I have very good experience with, whether I'm experiencing physical pain or the onset of a cold or any sort of symptoms. I go to acupuncture and I feel something change, and not feel so. I'll walk out very often different than I went in. I had a bad shoulder injury a number of years ago, and physical therapist, and considering different stuff. And I said, you know what, let me try acupuncture. It took 3 or 4 appointments, and I've never had the problem again. Right? I've had physical, I've had other things, but when I mention it to someone, suddenly there's explanations that need to be given. But if I take an Advil for pain or surgery for pain, maybe surgery is not as good example, but take an Advil for pain, the person on the other end pretends to understand why the chemicals in Advil have an effect, and needles just is crazy. They just told us that just because from a young age they made that link between us, that this chemical helps with this symptom, doesn't make it any less hokey than a needle or I don't know, or a plant or whatever other medications people use for things. I know a story of someone who, say a young kid, 6, 7, 8, who was dealing with terrible kidney issues. And doctors were trying a number of different things. It was affecting everything from his height, his weight loss, his mood, his whole life was affected by it. Eventually wanted to put him on dialysis. And someone recommended to the parents, don't go down that road until you've tried some of the natural medicines. And they heard about a natural doctor. They're living up in New York. They heard about a natural doctor in Florida. They came down here, and through some, hokey methods, he determined that there were certain minerals and vitamins that can help the kid. Yeah. And turns out it helped him. And not instantaneously, not magic, but over the course of the next few months, the condition that was baffling the Western doctors to the point that they wanted to put a young child on dialysis was cured or was manageable. And the doctors who were treating him in hospitals, Western medicine, wanted to understand, how did you do this? So eventually a call was set up between the doctor, the holistic doctor, and the Western doctors. They said, okay, tell us what you did. And he said, well, when I went through the process of trying to determine what the source of this issue was, I noticed there was a certain deficiency of vitamins and minerals, possible, I don't know, whatever, possible, some other stuff, maybe parasite, I don't know what he said, right? Number of different things. And as a result, I treated it in this way. So they asked him, are you saying that every single time the kidney is failing in this way, you can use um, this protocol? And he said, no, of course not. Meaning the kidney can be failing for a number of different reasons. In this case, it was, um, it was overworking because of something else, meaning the problem was in the kidney, the problem was somewhere else. So I treated that, and then the kidney was able to get back to normal. And the doctor told me the story, and he said that he was unable to get them comfortable with his method of healing because it wasn't linked to the direct symptom. He couldn't say this symptom, this cure. He has this symptom. Yeah. I'm going to go through a holistic process of understanding what is the root in this. And he says maybe the root's emotional, right? Maybe the root is food based, and he has to eat different foods. There's a number of different things. I can't tell you every time you see the symptom, take this treatment. And he said the conversation kind of ended there because the Western approach is, if this is the symptom, how do I deal with it? Versus this symptom is pointing to a much larger issue that is that's all connected to this whole person. And then from there, how do I address it?
Absolutely. So,
it's unfortunate that approach is considered hokey. That's what's so unfortunate. That's a result of very, very deep programming that we've all gone through.
The programming that we have is that everything's a quick fix. And you see it today. You see it with people don't feel comfortable to be distracted or to be in pain for a moment. And if they don't have something to do, they need to be on their phones, or they need to be smoking something, drinking something, doing something, be busy with things. It's painful to be with yourself. It's painful to explore yourself. So I always say a lack of patience is a lack of love, or the other way around. Even a lack of love is a lack of patience.
So a lack of patience, someone for themselves, or
you don't have patience in your own healing process. Right.
It's a lack of love towards yourself.
You want to just get rid of that. You're ignoring what your body's communicating with you. Every time you get sick, every time you have something, your body's communicating something with you. You get sick with a cold. So your body's telling you you're working too hard, let's say. Your immune system is not functioning well. You need rest. You need sleep. Most of the time, and I was always brought up with this, you need sleep and you need water. You need to drink water and you need sleep. And now we can't feel pain for a moment. So you take Tylenol or you take something else that cures it. We're going to doctors, and doctors became subscribers of pills.
Right. I think some of it is that, but there is something else also, which is, yes, we want quick fixes, but there's also a programming going on that these are considered acceptable and reasonable solutions for a problem, and these are considered crazy.
And
why would I rather speak to someone and get their worldview spewed all over me versus breathing? Like, why wouldn't I try the breathing first?
It's programming, like you said.
Yeah.
It becomes a programming, and the breath work today is the hottest thing in the healing world, so to speak, and psychedelics. And 10 years ago, we started doing breath work or working with breath work, and everyone was like laughing that you can do breath work and heal stuff. And today people are making money off of teaching people how to breathe. It sounds funny, but this is where the world is shifting, and the world is waking up. I think COVID,
because it works.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is it works. I mean, there's no.
But you can't say that.
What?
But you can't say that.
Can't say what?
You can't say that it works. You can't say these are proven methods, because everything in the medical world is, like you said, symptomatic, and you have to diagnose, and this works for everyone, and they have to fit it into a box like this is the solution. And it's not. The path of each person is individual. It's an individual healing. And so when my mother was going through her whole health thing, so I was always trying to find, I was doing a ton of research on different modes of healing, of how she could come out of it. And we started doing this heavy dose marijuana treatment for her. She never did marijuana in her life. So next thing you know, my mother's getting high, and she felt like scared, like dopey and whatever. But we went to the doctors, and we would go for these weekly meetings, and they showed that the levels of oxygen and blood work was improving or stable. And then all of a sudden they just said, okay, we're going to do this radiation. And I'm like, why? And even the last day before she passed away, she took 2 pills and she took it down, because she was trying at that point that she wanted to continue life, but it was too late.
Right.
And so I took that marijuana treatment, and I decided, I'm going to try this treatment myself because, again, that eczema, and that was the thing that
You were still dealing with the eczema?
still into my adulthood
Oh,
dealing with
wow.
it. Times of stress, heavy stress, unprocessed emotions, different things would trigger it, or certain foods. So I was sort of managing it. I went through that process where it's supposed to like reboot your whole immune system. I
The
did it.
marijuana is.
Yeah. And you get to a point where it's like you no longer become high, and it just becomes like it's just flowing through your system and just cleaning up your immune system. And I 90% cured my eczema. And then through more energetic work, it's really not there. It doesn't show up these days. And I took that marijuana treatment stuff, and the guy called me out of the blue, whatever. I did more research about it, and I was always in the know. And he had lung cancer, a client of mine. And he said, I don't know what to do. He's just opening up to me. I took him to visit my guy that does these treatments. 6 months under this, no chemotherapy, nothing, zero, completely cured from cancer. How can you explain that? So I'm not saying it's going to work for everyone, but
Right.
there's other ways to do this, but it's a patient process. It's slow, and nobody wants to deal with that. Nobody wants to recognize that cancer is a communication. It's a communication. It's telling you something. And Gabor Mate will even tell you that cancer, 90 whatever percent of the time, comes from repressed anger.
So right in his book, When the Body Says No, I think he connects breast cancer specifically to repressed anger. Yeah, which no one wants to hear.
Yeah, of course.
Like, a lot of people don't want to hear that.
That's a scary place to put your
Blaming the victim.
Yeah.
But I don't see it as blaming the victim. I see it as empowering the person suffering. You don't have to wait for the doctor. And like you said, it's not necessarily going to work each time, but I'd much rather go through those processes. And what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to feel better.
Well, you have to challenge the whole medical system and what they put out there and tell you is the right way to go. And you have to, and it's a very scary place to be when you get diagnosed, and it's like a heaviness.
Right.
And you get scared and you freeze up and you lose trust in yourself and your own way of exploring your own journey of health, and you give it over to somebody else who.
Right.
So.
I mean, I guess in terms of what's the worst that can happen, someone can die, but I'm not talking about those more serious cases. I'm just in general, the concept of healing and using some of these other
the guy that I have up in Toronto that I know, he's outside of Toronto, healed 54 people with stage 4 cancer, and he's proof. He'll show you all the proof.
I mean, I've shared on this that I went into 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, different times of my life, not feeling well. And each time I learned something specifically about what was going on. And 2 of the 3, the thing that I was dealing with at the beginning of the journey, I was not dealing with at the end. And I'm not talking 90% better. I'm talking eliminated.
Amazing.
And it showed me very clearly, like I experienced on it, where in that space where you have a heightened sense of awareness, so just the thought of something can trigger a symptom. And when symptoms I was dealing with, just thinking about that person can all of a sudden trigger a terrible cough or a pain or whatever else was going on. And then working through the emotional underlying difficulties behind that, suddenly I came out of the experience feeling better. I mean,
and you experience that emotion, right?
Yeah, for sure, exactly. That's what I'm
so
saying.
when you experience that emotion, it's like the emotion is attached to it is communication that needs to surface to the body and show you, hey, your knee is in pain, not just because your knee is in pain, or your back is in pain, not just because your back is in pain. And these are old age practices. It's not like, or age old practices. It's not like just coming out of nowhere and just flying into the world from nowhere. This is Chinese medicine, whatever else was available back in the day to connect different body parts to different things that are going on inside.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's, even within Hebrew, right, the word for like anger is very similar to the word for liver, and the concept of the liver being like the place where a certain type of anger originates. And so liver problem can.
I mean, in Hasidus, in Chabad Hasidus, they talk about where things are stored. It's like right there. I mean, I even think that a lot of the stuff that if we want to find the secrets of the world are right there in Chassidus. It's teaching you, but we're afraid to trust these things. We're afraid to really believe them.
There's this saying, I think it's of the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, says, a small hole in the body is a big hole in the soul.
Yeah, I think it was the Rebbe
Or a small
Rashab.
problem in the
Yeah, I
Rebbe
think-
Rashab, yeah. Okay, a
but-
small problem in the body is a big problem in the soul.
Yeah.
Right? Meaning the
And do we believe that?
right, that's when push comes to
So
shove.
it's like
too.
you hear a concept, and then when push comes to shove, you get sick. Do you go to the doctor? Do you take the vaccine? Do you go through that treatment?
Actually, I have Remy Gurari, who you had the opportunity to meet today, shared a video of the Rebbe with me from a few weeks ago. He shared it with me of someone, I think he said it was a family member who was going by the Rebbe, and said another family member was not feeling well. And the Rebbe said something like, when he addresses his anger, the sickness will pass too, or something to that effect. There's a certain emotion. When that's addressed, his sickness will pass too. If when this is being edited, they ask me for that video. I'll share it so we can put it. We can actually put it in if they remember. Whoever's editing it, ask me for it. We'll include that clip in here.
Amen.
Sie haben nicht gesehen, gewinnt die Dach.
Also mal schädig, das ist ein Sache, was nicht gesund.
Als was?
Also mal schädig, das ist winzige Sache, was nicht
Ja,
gesund.
da hat es
Das ist durchgehend zu werden den ganzen gesund.
It's not so crazy, and we've been led to believe it's pretty hokey, which is very unfortunate.
So it becomes a process of knowing yourself and trusting yourself. And I think, as we're speaking out the Rebbe, and there's not so much world leadership. It becomes a very internal process of me going through life, because I have to have access to all the wisdom, and now I got to choose to believe what I want to believe about life, and I got to go and show up to that. And
Right.
whoever the world leaders are end up becoming just the loudest voices. And do we choose to believe them, or do we choose to believe what we know?
Well, I
to be
actually think
true?
it's a neat time, in history, because if you think about 50, 60 years ago, right, a lot of things was directed by the Rebbe, right? Or prior to that, there was in general the concept of a world leader who kind of a communal leader, or a figure who a lot of things were run by, was comforting on the one hand, but there's another aspect of it that was somewhat, okay, I got to fall in line with this. So there's a part of that journey that can feel very scary, because the whole world is open and we don't have clear direction. Where should I go? But as like our feet settle on the ground a little bit, and we start feeling a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning, I find it much more liberating. I hear people talk all the time about wanting to go back to a time that was, which is a very ungodly concept, to want something to be different than.
Well, they actually want something even deeper. It's almost like they're like wanting mentorship in their life, or wanting direction. They don't feel confident themselves to know the message clearly.
Right,
But
and
at
that's
the
not
end of
why
the
it's
day-
scary.
But at the end of the day, who was the guy that went into the Yam Suf was not Moshe Rabbeinu, right? It was
That's a good
Nachshon.
point. Yeah,
So we who's going to be the
Yeah, we have this.
the foot soldiers to carry out the message.
Right, the story of
Not
Pinchas
to
as
say
well.
Nachshon was any less of a like he wasn't like a big man himself, but
You're saying he wasn't a lightweight, but at the same point in time, he was not the leader of the generation, and
the people that are carrying out the Rebbe's missions today are the shulchan.
I think Pinchas didn't check with Moses before, killing it. Was it Zimri and Cosby, whatever that's.
He came and he checked with him, and then Moshe forgot the halacha, and he said, because okay, it's your mission. So he went and did his thing. But
He did check.
yeah, but,
Oh, I thought it was
but
specifically
Moshe
checked.
forgot the halacha. He reminded him, and then it became his mission. But it was almost like he needed to forget purposely for whatever reason.
Right.
It was his
Yeah.
mission.
There's definitely an aspect of it that's incredibly daunting. Where do I go, and not having a clear leader that one can follow. And then on the flip side, it's also incredibly liberating and cool. And I think that it's the time we live in.
Yeah.
Whether we
it's-
like it or not, it's the time we live in. We
it's-
may as well
it's here.
embrace it.
It's here. There's the message needs to become my message, and what I choose to believe from before me. I mean, the message always comes from before me because they came first, and they're passing down life from closest to the source, right? Like the message started with Adam and Eve, let's just say, The message got passed down, and throughout generations, we have to keep that message true because it comes closer to the source. So we got to go back, but how much do I believe in that message? That becomes a challenge today, because there's so much available out there that will tell you, well, this is the way to be happy in life, or this is the way. And where is the source of where I'm getting my information from?
Yeah, there's also a way to apply it in the here and now, right? How do we? There was that world, and today is this world, and how do we, continuing in that chain, how do we deal with today's reality? It's a different enemy. I was interviewing someone.
Is it a different enemy?
It's a different expression, certainly, with a different challenge. Yeah, certainly. I was talking to this guy, Bensi Often. We haven't released the interview as of now, but probably by the time this one goes out, we will have. And he said something which was fascinating. He spoke about the concept of bris, and how early on the bris was I don't remember the source he quoted, but he said a bris was more of like drawing blood from the site of the bris. And then eventually, over time, as Jews found themselves in different situations, it became more of a removal of the foreskin. He said because the Jewish leaders at the time determined that what was appropriate at a certain time wasn't going to protect us
Right.
now. We needed a different level of protection and a more obvious sign for whatever reason. So he used that as an example of saying there was a different enemy now, right? There's a different world that we needed to deal with, and as a result, a different set of rules would put in. Of course, who makes those rules, and steeped in tradition a certain way, and there's a process for that. I'm not suggesting any sort of willy-nilly process. I'm not promoting Reform Judaism. What I'm saying is that the concept there of we're dealing with something new. I'll give you an example of one way I address that. It's probably an example I've shared before. Is a number of times people 18, 19, or 20, younger, will call me really struggling with porn and getting beat up like crazy over this. It's, I got addicted as a teenager, but there were dial-up internet. I mean, there was laptops. We're smartphones. So I feel for these kids, man. I'm thinking, like, what would I do with those urges and those desires at 13, 14, 15? What I was feeling, and I was waiting for my house to go to sleep so I can go on dial-up internet. Imagine I had a smartphone that I can go to the bathroom, where my addiction would have progressed. And I'm talking to these kids, 18, 19 years old, and they're feeling so bad for themselves, so disgusting and so horrible. I'm like, dude, like, you're up against you're up against an enemy, man. I mean, this is not an easy thing. Like, if you're fighting it, if you're addressing it, if you're aware of it at 18, 19 years old, like, hats off to you. I didn't pick this up until my late 20s that I was dealing with something that really warranted attention. So you're dealing with it now. Like, man, I bow to you. Like, you're freaking amazing. But oftentimes there's a level of programming that they'll have about it for themselves. And I'm thinking of one situation of a kid, sweet kid, really so much guilt, racked with guilt. I'm like, where did you get this from? He's like, I feel so disgusting. I said, disgusting for what? For having a sex drive? For enjoying looking at beautiful women? What is it that's disgusting about this? You don't want to do it? I'm all for it. I'm all for not doing it. I'm the guy who talks about not doing it and the benefits of it. But it's not disgusting to desire it. That's not the way this works. You weren't embedded with a disgusting desire. It's just, how do we channel it? How do we maintain it? How do we tame the beast, but not to feel so guilty? And, one religious quote, another religious quote, I'm like, who told you this? I want to know the guy who used, because the Torah can be used in many different ways, and the Torah can be used to really make someone feel horrible about himself. You're committing a Holocaust and how many lives you're destroying and everything else. I said, who's the guy telling you? Who's the guy? So he tells me the name. I said, how old is he? He says in his mid to late 50s. I said, then I have no interest in what he has to say. I said, I can't talk to you. I can't say to you, because I don't know what you've dealt with. I didn't grow up at 13 years old with a smartphone in my hand. So this guy who didn't even grow up with a computer and a laptop wants to tell you how you should feel, disgusting and low and all of those things. I think he has no place. And that's what I mean. It's certainly a different enemy.
But there's
and
a disconnect. They don't.
What?
There's a disconnect to be able to really get that message over, because every message has to be able to be received in the end of the day. So let's just say the message is true, whatever the Torah is saying about not doing that, but the message isn't about what you shouldn't do. The message is, let's get to the core of why you're doing this to begin with. What are you after?
Also, right, there's also a time and place for the message. Where I am today, I'm reading books not only from a religious perspective, but from a not a secular, but things like semen retention and the value of preserving one seed, and even within the context of a marriage, like I'll read those things and I'll benefit from those where I am today, where I don't feel like I'm completely controlled by my sex drive, and then I'll see the finer benefits in a life with these practices. But these same ideas, when I'm steeped in addiction and I'm feeling an incredible amount of anxiety, and the one place where I find a little solace is in pornography or sexual addiction, it's the wrong time to introduce this truth. It's just inhumane. It's just cruel to introduce it. It's not less true. It's just not the time. Right now, when someone is struggling with that, it's how do you deal with anxiety? How do you deal with your stress? Don't worry. Is there somewhere where it says that not engaging in sex to an extreme will benefit you? Sure, that's true. Right? There are many levels of truth. That truth is not necessary for you right now. You know, am I going to tell a guy who's 100 pounds overweight and someone who's used to a 10,000 calorie a day diet about the benefits of only eating vegan or vegetarian? Like, take someone where they're at, meet them where they're at.
I listen. I'm going to talk to this point because it just sort of progresses as my story progresses. It just like segues nicely in. Is, as you're saying, is okay. So then I watched my mother pass away, and I was the one that zipped her up in the body bag. Wow. And it's really, really intense process, but I was disconnected because I couldn't feel that in that moment. How could you feel that you're doing that? How could you even imagine that happening? It's like, it's very heavy. This is the person that brought you into the world. And so I went on this place. I'm just saying Kaddish. I'm just doing what I got to do. Right. And that was my focus. I was a soldier. There's nothing else. There's nothing to talk about. Yeah, I would go on workshops. But my main thing for going on a workshop was, is there a minyan? Make sure I have a minyan. So I was facilitating and doing it, but somewhat in a robotic place in my own life. And then as soon as I finished Kaddish, I said, okay, I'm going into my own personal journey. As that happened, COVID breaks out. And, before that, after my mother passed away, 6 months later, my two oldest children, their uncle, so it'd be their father's brother, took his life.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm in the middle of all this, like my mother, I'm doing with my own stuff, and now, boom, this gets just dropped into the space of our family, and it was just so intense. It was like the funeral that they never had for their own father, they never experienced, especially my daughter is, now it's just like unearthed, and she has to see it in the shrieking. I've never seen something like this before. So intense.
You're saying the intensity of the funeral itself.
I went with them. I drove them, me and them, to my wife. And then my kids, those two kids, went on their own religious journey of like challenging religion. More so my son, he went through a place of just not caring, not wanting. Right. And, I tried at first to like sort of battle it, like, oh, you should do this. Just try to get him to do an extra mitzvah. And I realized there's nothing there to talk to. As soon as, that was going to be 4 years ago, this Hanukkah, and then COVID breaks out. He's in Crown Heights in some like whatever yeshiva for like kids that are sort of like, half in, half out. I hate that way of describing it, but and he comes home, and I just held space for him. I was just there for him, just bringing him with him and talking about real life issues, but no agenda. There's no agenda here, and keeping an open space for him to ask me questions. And I just sat with it for a year and a half without any agenda. The only thing I ask is just wear a yarmulke in my house. That's all I want. Just to respect that the other kids could see somewhat of an example, so they don't have to always question. It's hard for me as a father in this, like, you do your own path. I give you space to do your own path. And holding space for that at the time was interesting. It's almost like he was matching my vibration. Like, I'm feeling even more disconnected from God, even though I'm doing Kaddish and whatever, because you just took my mother. So like he was matching my vibration of like death, not caring. And he just went more than me because I'm a father in a family and I don't have that luxury.
Right.
But it really challenged my own relationship, which was scary. I'm sure for my wife to watch any of these changes, or watching how I'm disconnecting. I'm like not giving Dvar Torahs over at the Shabbos table and whatever, like I would. And I was forced to face that after COVID broke out. I went into a deep journey of, even after being a part of and running these workshops, my own deep journey of healing. That's what it became. And as I went to a workshop, we had a woman there. Her name is Folly Klein,
Mm-hmm.
and
I'm speaking to her about getting her on the.
Okay, fine. I can put in a good word. Not
she's
that
on
I
board.
need to. I'm just joking.
I don't know who recommended it, but
So I went to this workshop. Staff day was dedicated for me because the guys had seen what I was going through. We did this facilitation, which was a 3-hour-long facilitation, and it's called Family Constellations. It shows you where your energy is stuck in your whole family, and I can't even explain it to you because it's an experiential.
Downward or upward?
Just where you are in your own family and what's stuck, and the people surrounding you, people that are in your life that could be passed away or they could be there. And I can't explain it to you because it's somewhat going to cheapen it, but I'll give you the main things and can explain how it works and what it's all about necessarily. Is what I watched is every single person in my family and what they're going through and how I relate to them. Someone was playing my mother, just took on the energy of my mother and literally had trouble breathing and fell to the ground and was like as if dead. And my 3 siblings that I have ran over towards the body, and then I just gravitate over towards her, and there's just crying and crying and crying and crying, like beyond. And then the other thing that came up was my wife's previous husband, how much he's like the shadow in my life, and I don't feel confident to step into anywhere. I'm playing small as a father because I haven't found my place yet. And those are my 2 biggest energies that were stuck.
Right.
Went through that grieving process, and then my son went, and my daughter both had their process, which whatever that was, which ended up manifesting in real life. I went through that process, and then it took a year to unravel that whole story. And I started the grieving process for my mother. I finally started that process. Starting that process from my mother, opening up to my own thing, opened up my relationship to God again.
Beautiful.
It was almost like the thing that I didn't want to face is exactly what I need to face, which would open up all level of ability to be open to relationships. I only started learning about what my mother meant to me once I lost her. And I only started working on my relationship and the dysfunction that I had from her, right? Because even though she was the greatest mother, there were still things that I didn't get from her that I needed, which then led me into working on around like doing deeper work around my father as well, because I'm 50% my father and 50% my mother. So I come from them, and therefore, I can't run away from that experience. I gotta understand what I was given growing up and what my makeup is and what came before me. I gotta respect that. Everyone wants to say they're a self-made person. You're not self-made. There's a fact here. You came from these 2 people, and your masculine part of you, how you show up as a masculine, is going to be based on what you got from your father, what you didn't get from your father, and what you got from your mother. When you didn't get from your mother is going to be that feminine. Then when you get married, you're just going to see everything pop up in front of your face of what you need to work on. Your wife's going to show you exactly what you need to work on. And that's when that whole thing began. And as I opened up more to being available to myself, my wife opened up, and just things opened up, and my son came back. He came back in a very, very strong way, but real. It was slow. I had to be very patient. It was through my own removing those stuck energies, or working through those stuck energies, I was able to really help him through it.
Right. So a question in dealing with that, because a lot of parents, parents who are religious and religion is important to them and Judaism is important to them, have that where their children move away from it, and then dealing with that is quite a challenge for a lot of people. Recently, I attended a workshop with Avi Fishoff, Twisted Parenting, where he deals pretty much exclusively with these types of situations, and the parents learning to live with that. But when you were saying your story, and you had mentioned that your child, in response to something, in response to what happened with his uncle, which most likely ignited feelings that were inside him about his biological father, he distanced himself from Judaism, or from what he perceived as God. To me, that feels very, very godly. Like was that your experience of it as well? I can tell you what I mean by that.
I believe, and we can always say it after it, but I believe that it was the most godly experience because he needed to choose God for himself.
Right. I don't mean it necessarily in that way, meaning
Okay.
in and of itself, even if he never returned, in and of itself, returned, whatever that means, even in and of itself, the fact that he's associating a certain kind of negative experience with incompatible with God, like that's a very godly position, meaning it's not neutral. We're not neutral on God. If someone who says that I cannot be religious after seeing the Holocaust, right? Meaning I think what they're saying is very godly in the sense that I believe God to be good and I can't reconcile this, so I must distance myself from these practices. But all along the line, they're recognizing a reality of a God, a reality of a good God, a reality of a Jewish connection to God. There's a lot of that action is built on certain facts, which this person has to deeply hold. And the fact that it expressed in a way that possibly a father doesn't want, underlying it is something, I think, beautiful.
Absolutely. I mean, and eventually, I think what the journey of the soul is that I have to get to that point where I can realize what is going on over here. So I think the deeper the disappointment, the deeper the longing. It's like I wanted something so much and I was let down. It shoots me down even further. So if I completely disconnect or I go off, that means there's more pain there because I had more hopes.
Right, and that's a beautiful thing, right? To want God to be good, to
100%.
want to demand certain things. That relationship, one an exercise that I've done a lot one-on-one with people is to write a letter, which oftentimes within their healing journey, and they grew up religious, there's going to be this association. Write a letter towards God, like from a place of anger, and express that anger fully with whatever 4-letter words are necessary for that process. Because to me, it's quite an authentic relationship.
Well, anger just comes from love in the end of the day.
Sure, yeah.
Because why do I have anger? You mean you wouldn't get angry if there was this God that you didn't identify with,
Correct.
And, so to speak, prescribed certain set of rules and things. It's I'm angry at you because it's like a prism. It's like you shoot that light through the prism. It's that white light, and then it comes out in many different colors. And I got to find my way back to that white light. So one of the colors of that love that really is where all creation comes from, and it goes through that prism, sometimes comes out in the form of hate, anger, sadness.
Sure. Yeah.
And that is a communication that's trying to bring me back to that place where I could say, even though you did this, when I authentically go into the experience of sadness or hate or anger, I can realize that I can come back to God because that was a stuck thing, and it makes my relationship even that much more deep, even that much more unlimited, because nothing can take me away from that source. Now, the feelings in the end of the day are there, as I said, mirrors of the soul. It's guiding me,
Sure.
whether I hear the message or not. And what the unfortunate facts is, like we're going back to with the medication, is that people are shutting down those parts of themselves that they need to pay attention to. They need to pay attention to those emotions. They need to know what is there, because underneath all emotion is a certain belief. Right? Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, it's like we lose touch with the truth behind that thing because we're uncomfortable with the expression of it. There's a story I heard Vadim Steinsaltz where he learned of someone told him about a guy who was eating on Yom Kippur, And Adin's response was, I heard this story again. It's not like verified all the way through. Adin Steinsal's response was, he celebrates Yom Kippur in my way, and I celebrate it in his way, and I celebrate it in my way, or I honor it in my way. Meaning there's something about that action, right? I'm specifically going to do this on Yom Kippur that shows a passion, a care, a something about Yom Kippur. Like I've heard that, couples which don't fight or which stop fighting, right? It's close to the end, right? If you're not caring, and I think the same is true in a relationship with God. Like it's something beautiful. I'm not saying people should eat on Yom Kippur. What I'm saying is that expression of someone, like what's behind that when we see someone, you're so disappointed and you're so angry and you're expressing it in this way. There's so much belief. There's so much holiness in that. There's a lot to work with. If the end goal.
So that thing that you're talking about, where you could see that, it's like, how could I be able to see that? What's the ingredient for me to be able to show up to people like that? And if I tie it back to the story with my son, it's like having compassion for where I was at and dealing with where I was at to meet him where he's at.
Right, meaning if you were unwilling, if I understand what you're saying, if you were unwilling to be honest about the fact that you were disconnected from your own Judaism and you were just practicing it by rote, then his disconnection would have been much more triggering for you.
Yeah, and I would be trying to control it to have this image that says we're from family, we're this, we're that, whatever. But in the end of the day, your kids are a reflection of you.
Right. Meaning his lack of practice was a reflection of your lack of practice.
Because your kids are receiving everything from you.
Right.
They rely on you. An animal, unlike animals, where an animal can be born and then go out into the wild and create its own life, a child doesn't just need you for survival biologically, but it becomes an emotional dependency where I am forming my emotions and my expressions of who I am because I have the mind as well. And those are the programs and the filter to my experience. I'm relying on you, so I become reliant on survival to live and all that stuff. And then all the other stuff in there ends up getting and becoming the program. So my kids end up being a reflection of what I'm giving over to them.
Understood. So and
even if the world is giving them something, and you want to blame the world, let's say, how do you help them process through that? That's from you and your wife, right?
But oftentimes it's similar to what we said before. If the world is giving them something, right, then they're out there seeking something. There was a need maybe that wasn't met that then they go out in the world to seek, in much the same way that you said that you didn't feel this vulnerability and connection at home, right? Physically there was support, maybe even in some ways emotionally, but there was a certain level of vulnerability that you weren't getting from your parents. It was the death of your grandmother or grandfather that you weren't able to process with them, and then say, okay, I'm going to seek it out for them. So your parents afterwards can say, I don't like the friends you're choosing, but why am I choosing the friends? Because there's a need that I'm missing here. So either way, it's a reflection that just points back at what's there or not there. Similar to what we said also about call the chauffeur, right? That we get upset at the community members, right? There's a lashing out at the community members who went to call the chauffeur, instead of saying, what is the need that's not being addressed in our community that people feel some sort of pull towards there? What is going on that they say, I have the Tanya, I have my Mashpia, I have all these classes in Crown Heights, I have all these things available to me, but there's this retreat somewhere in Toronto, and I'm going to get something meaningful there. Why? Because there's something lacking here. But instead we point at them and say, you're doing it the wrong way.
Instead of trying to help and support.
Instead of realizing it's a representation of us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And simple teaching of the Baal Shem Tov is you see something wrong, you have anger or hate towards something, it's a reflection of something that's going on yourself, and go see what the reflection is and see what your area of work is there, rather than putting something down and squashing it.
Right. It's also it's also telling us often such an important truth. I have an episode on the podcast called Anxiety is My Teacher or something, right? Anxiety is a teacher. My relationship, I had a terrible anxiety, panic attacks, and it was like just constantly in this state of anxiety, this perpetual state of anxiety. And the way I healed it was actually befriending it. This wasn't this negative thing that came my way. It was this piece of information that I was resisting in its more modest expressions, that now was being kind enough to let me know in a more in a louder way, right? We don't get upset at that. If someone's knocking at the door and we don't answer right away, and they knock a little louder, like, okay, thank you for knocking louder. I was in the back room, I didn't hear it. It's the same with anxiety. Like, I was underground, I was numb, I wasn't feeling anything. It's like, thank you for knocking a little louder. So I came, and that was a switch for me. Anxiety was no longer the problem; it was the solution. It was the answer to my questions.
Yeah, because in the end of the day, it was a communication,
It was the truth, yeah.
and it was pointing me in a direction. And so why am I shutting that part of me out of my life? Why am I shutting it down?
Right.
Because it's scary. And when I was a kid, let's say, that anxiety wasn't met with what it needed. So I didn't know how to work with it. I didn't know what to do with it. And I will show up exactly the way my parents taught me to show up. So suppress it, take medication, whatever else the solution is. But if I was met in an environment where my parents could hold that space and say, hey, come here. What's going on for you? Let's talk about it. And I felt safe. So my mother's going to remind me how to feel safe about my life. And when I come home and I get bullied, it's like the example I always give. You go to school, you get bullied. Okay, it's a problem, but you can't avoid the problem because sometimes in life that's going to happen. The problem really becomes when you come home. So if I come home and my mother meets me with love and I can cry in her arms, and the bully was really teaching me a message that you're not good enough or you're a loser.
I'll get more in front of the...
Oh, sorry about that. And so you're a loser. Then I have to go back to my mother to remember who I am. She teaches me who I really am. So she'll hold that space for me, right? She manifests all the limbs of what I was, came from the Father, the potential of everything, and then came into her. And she helps manifest the goodness and feeling good about my life. That's what she does. She holds me. She holds me in her room. She holds me when she nurses, and she continues to hold me. That energy, the feminine energy. And then the Father is, as you're leaving the door, he teaches you how to face the world. So he says, okay, this is what you do to the bully. So I need those ingredients in life. And when I don't have those, the only thing I can do is have a coping mechanism, right?
It's funny because it was happening with my son, where he's 5 years old, and he came, like, one of the kids mistreated him in school. One kid, my son, he's not in a Jewish school, but there's a lot of Jewish kids there. And one kid wears a yarmulke, and he told my son, you're not a real Jew.
Nice. Nice.
Not a real Jew because yarmulke and because whatever, He comes with his pre-packed lunches, and my kid just chooses vegetarian options, whatever,
Okay.
So he told him that it was the last thing it was literally the last thing I expected.
Especially
but it was,
from that kid, right?
It was seeing the difference between the way my wife addressed it, my son's mother, and me as a father addressed it. Like, I was giving him more instruction. My wife was giving him more. Is that a Freudian slip twice? My wife was giving him more.
We could go into that right now. We could do a whole process around it, but I don't think.
My wife was getting more of that support, and then some of the advice with that and other stuff was like harsh for my wife. I was like, you can't give that advice. And I was like, listen, I grew up as a boy. I understand boys, and we have to, just be a certain level of protection.
Yeah, I mean.
What I told him to say was, I said, tell him that a yarmulke or not a yarmulke, it doesn't determine whether someone is Jewish. I said, tell him your daddy's a rabbi, and he said that it's the Jewish thing is to act nicely, and you're not acting Jewish right now. You're still Jewish, but you're not acting Jewish because the Jewish way is to act nice. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's good. And again, she's giving him that love, and you're giving him that confidence.
Right. It was just interesting that you said it, because it became more of like a right or wrong approach. But the way you addressed it was, no, the mother has a certain role and the father has a certain role, and each one giving him that way. So it just
you also got to be connected to the emotional side of what your son's going through, so it doesn't come as a harsh message when he's ready to, give that advice, because he needs to go face the world. But yeah, that's what the father's job is. The father goes out to the world because you're gonna have to face the world. You make the money. You take the money and then you bring it back home, and then your wife converts it into something that is good and nurturing for the rest of the family. She's the one that takes care of the home, not that she can't work or a father can't stay home necessarily, but that's generally the role. The father is the infinite, right? He goes out and faces everything, and like that's where the consciousness of the child That's where the sperm comes from the mind of the father, and then it goes, and the wife holds it, and manifests into different limbs.
Physical.
And yeah, that's the process of life. So I'm following that process of life in the womb, outside the womb. And I got to be able to go back. If I don't have a mother today, I got to be able to go back to my feminine energy, what I need from the feminine, that energy, which is beyond the physical body and the person, and recognize, which ends up becoming the work of what we do around this. And it's like, if people would do these 3 steps, I think this is one of the most powerful things that we could really take away from all of this and all the issues surrounding everything is I have to first and foremost acknowledge what is. Like, where am I at? Where am I showing up from?
Right.
Seeing yourself.
Not suppressing it, not denying it, being fully honest about where it's at.
So if I say that my connection to God is I'm struggling with my connection to God, so is that a scary statement to put out there? Well, maybe it's scary because I'm supposed to look like I'm all taken care of, and I'm supposed to provide this image to the world, but then
that's not true, right? There's a disconnect.
There's a part of me that's not truthful. It's not authentic. So acknowledge what is. And if I can acknowledge what is, I'm feeling a lack of love or anything that I'm dealing with in my life, I can acknowledge what is first. And then the second thing is, okay, so if I acknowledge that, so what's my responsibility here? What do I have? How do I have to show up to this? What do I have to own here? And that becomes the next step.
So follow with that example.
Okay, so let's take an example here. So let's say, for example, I'm gonna combine 2 things, because I'll teach one thing that we give over in our workshop. I think is a valuable tool that maybe we could start thinking about life a little bit differently. But if you think about a typical triggering situation in life, and why do I say trigger? Because a trigger is, again, a feeling, and it's leading us back to something. It's communication. This is thinking about life. This is experiencing life. So what's my experience of life? What do I want my experience to be like? And I keep that in my mind. And you ask someone on the street, how you doing? They say, I'm good. That means nothing to me. Like, there's something here, and maybe it's not the opportune time to talk about it, but everyone's going through stuff. Everyone's experiencing something. I come home, and my wife says, take out the garbage. I take out the garbage, and all of a sudden, I start feeling angry. And why am I feeling angry? So if I think I could get lost, and when I'm disconnected from myself, I'm looking to the outside world for the answers. So I say, my wife is acting like a fill in the blank, right? She's acting like this, or she doesn't respect me. Again, I'm focused on her. When I'm disconnected from myself, I'm always talking about the outside world, always. And what's going to take me back into recognizing what's going on for me is if I can identify, what am I feeling right now? So if I'm feeling...
So there's the awareness, then bring it back to the responsibility. I'm not focused on the other person, I'm focused on myself. That's clear.
So a lot of times this is going to happen after the fact, that you'll be able to go back to this and process this. So there's the circumstance of what happened. I came home, she asked me to take out the garbage. That's the first step. The second step is, okay, when she told me to do that, what was I feeling? Or what was I thinking? They're interchangeable, but I was feeling angry. And my anger caused me, that anger has a certain focus, is she's disrespecting me. She doesn't respect the fact that I just worked the whole day and she's coming and telling me to take out the garbage. Really, all she asked me to take out the garbage, right? That was the circumstance that happened. And I started building this story and this belief about life and about her, and I'm eating the same thing, and I get angry, and then I blow up on her. I say, take it out yourself, okay? I'll take it out when I want to take it. Whatever I'm going to say, wherever I'm going to act from a place of anger, which is disconnected from me being able to show up as I really want to be able to show up, which is complete love and joy and presence and so on and so forth. So if I stopped in that moment and was able to breathe into that anger, just breathe into that anger, feel what's going on in your body. And what ends up happening is, because emotions are such a deep level of communication, you can take it will transport you back into a time in your life where you felt angry before, because the same anger I feel now is the same anger I felt before. And will trace me back to, not always, but sometimes, an earlier time, an earlier source of this. And if I can really get back to the real source of where this all happened, is like, it helps resolve, that's like the idea of doing tshuva, it helps resolve old stuck energy, where what seemed as one and done, or that was stamped of my existence, is stuck there. I can go back to it, feel into that anger. And when I feel into that anger, what I'll uncover is, from this whole process, is what did I really want? What was I really after? When I was angry, I was really after, I wanted to be respected. I wanted to know that I deserve respect. I wanted to know that even if my wife asked me to take out the garbage, it has nothing to do with how much I worked and anything like that. It's just I'm being guided.
So you're talking about awareness, responsibility, and then bring it back to the deeper meaning.
So sorry, that whole process, we call it on our workshop, it's called outside the box. It's taking the emotion and letting it out, like really expressing it in a healthy way. Underneath the emotion is a certain desire, a certain need, something that I want in my life. I want to be respected. That has nothing to do with my wife. That's me showing up angry because I don't think that I'm a respectable person, or someone taught me in my life growing up that I don't deserve respect, or they can disrespect me, and therefore I've been carrying that, and I'm still getting angry today because I'm waiting to wake up to the fact and acknowledge that all I really want is to be able to look at myself and I say I respect myself and I deserve respect, and just because I didn't get it doesn't mean that I don't deserve it. So it ends up, the program makers of my existence end up holding the keys to my life because I'm stuck in a moment in the past.
Right.
So I reface that. I say, I want to be respected. Fine. And now if I really breathe into the fact that I want to be respected, and that's all I really want here, and that's why I got angry. So I'm acknowledging that I'm angry because I want to be respected. So I acknowledge what is. I'm an angry person today. I show up with anger because I want to be respected. Now I have a certain understanding. I can take responsibility for it. I can say, okay, this is my anger, because all of my emotions are my expressions, nothing to do with the outside world. It's just a mirror for what I need to see about myself. That ends up becoming a way of taking responsibility and owning it and saying, I really want to be respected. That doesn't mean my wife has to give it to me still. I got to learn to earn that, because anything that I think that I need from my wife is really from unmet needs from my childhood, which creates an expectation on someone in my life. Because I didn't get it there, I think that they're going to give it to me now because I want to recreate something that I didn't have as a child.
Right.
I said that really fast, but I think
Makes
you got
sense.
it.
I got it.
The third part is, if I say I'm going to take responsibility for it and own it, just by acknowledging that and keeping that in my consciousness and really making that my drive and want, leads to the third step, which is what's called a movement, where I start to move into a new direction, where it's no longer me getting angry, because that doesn't work anymore. It's not effective. It's been hurting my relationship.
We have the awareness and the responsibility over this. It's ours. Now I can do something different than I did.
It's
previously.
not about like, okay, go do a meditation for 20 minutes a day and you'll solve it. Or, if you do breath work, or if, like you said before about the kidney, it's everyone's prescription is different. I have to know myself and what I need in order to build a sense of self-respect. And I got to start moving in that direction. And most of the time, it's going to be becoming aware of it and what the anger really wanted. And if I calm the anger down by knowing, or if I calm the anxiety by knowing what it's there for, and just befriend it, just become friends with that experience. Know that's your anger, know that's your fear, know that's your sadness. Be aware of it. Be really, really aware of it and what it wants. I end up shifting in a new direction. It just happens. It could be a day, it could be a month, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 10 years. The movement of the soul is very slow.
Slow.
Yeah, it's very slow. So anyone who wants a quick fix is not doing real work.
Oh.
That hurts when you said, oh?
No, I hear, because sometimes you see transformation very quickly, like something happens.
That breakthrough happens, but then, okay, so I have a breakthrough that this is where my anger comes from. Okay, doesn't mean I'm not going to get triggered again. I'm going to go into those things in order to
it's a flower blooming versus...
It's a flower blooming.
One thing I've said is that it takes a long time to build. It takes a short time to destroy. Right? You can take 5 years to build a building. You can blow it up in, 10 seconds. So sometimes when there's a lot of movement, if you're not sure what it is, it's probably destruction if it's happening very quickly. So I understand your point, but I was to the breakthrough that sometimes you see someone get an aha, like
Well,
Boom.
you're not also respecting the person that came before, the you that was in that place. You haven't met that person. You just want to transform your existence, which means it's like, see ya. It's like,
Right.
why am I making that quick switch? Like, let's go through all the process of how do you feel about that person that you were before. And if we really do that, the change happens. It happens for real. It's a more gradual process.
So you took us through your story. Bring us to now.
To now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I end up starting to get involved in this family constellation work where I see these stuck energies and realize that my wife's first husband is creating this dark cloud over me. I can't be myself. And slowly the movement that happens from that is, if I could acknowledge that that's where I'm stuck, if I could acknowledge that I didn't grieve for my mother yet, then I could start to make a process. It happened this summer. I did a Achnasa Sefer Torah for my mother in her honor. And I was in the office. We're about to do the whole thing. I was in the office. I never got the moment of all my siblings being around and crying over her body together. And that was the thing that was stuck. I brought them in, put their heads together. I said, before we celebrate this, before we're about to do this, we need to go through this grieving process where we just need to just cry it out. Just say, I miss you, Mom. And say goodbye and just let it happen, but together as a unit. Because when she passed away, we all like scattered into different directions. My life story is everyone goes into their own directions. And then because we had that moment, we could celebrate. And then a month later, my father got remarried. He got married to a new wife, and it was like that needed to happen before that happened. So I saw that, and that was May 2021. So it only manifested. We were August 2023, and as I started to go into that family constellation work and see where I was stuck, I was on a workshop, and I was with this guy, a good friend of mine named Ellie Bertram, and he said to me, you're preaching all this workshop stuff and going all in and, being your most authentic self and all that kind of stuff, but you're half-time banker, half-time or financial advisor and half-time doing this. Like, you got to go all in. And it hit me so hard. Like, it's like, this is one of my guys that I brought into the program, and he's challenging me. And I was like, it just hit me to the core. And I started to like make movements in that I wanted to do this full time. And we had different opinions within the partners of how we wanted to do this. And me and my brother-in-law, Nachman, aligned in that. And, Mo went on his separate journey and he started his own workshop. And we're doing our own thing, and we decided to call it Anochi, which is like, who am I? Because if I could see who I am, is that acknowledging what is. If I could really see who I am, then I could get back to that unlimited potential of possibility of really taking ownership of my life and not being guided by all these unconscious forces that are causing me to cause pain to people and all around me. And so we launched in January 2023, and we've been pushing strong that the world should know this. And from that point on, there's been a lot of pop-up workshops that have been happening.
So now you're full-time in this?
Full-time.
Beautiful.
It's hard for me to put that out to the world, but full-time. And this is my life since I was 3 years old, is wanting to bring healing and this possibility that, no, I don't have to be stuck in a certain circumstance. There's unlimited possibility to each person. We are limitless. And I have to be able to access it, and I have to have the tools to access that. So over the last 10 years, I've been building a repertoire of tools and modalities that we've been incorporating and on my own self journey of healing and guidance and mentorship, because the way that you're going to have an impact on people is when you're doing work on yourself, when you're
100%.
really facing the things that you need to face, you're living it, you're embodying it. And now we're doing it full time. We're almost at our year mark.
Awesome. How do people learn more about your workshops?
They can go on our website.
Anochi.com, or what is it?
Anochiworkshops.com.
ANOCHI.
Workshops.
Workshops.com. And men, women.
Oh, we decided as a result of that, we used to work with some other women on doing workshops in the past, but we decided that we're just going to focus on men. There's enough men in the world, enough clients, and that's what we're good at. And, there's other women out there like Chaisar
Yeah,
Gerwitz,
she
she's
was here a little
doing
bit
an
ago.
awakening, and Folly Klein,
Yeah.
she does Aya, and that I would feel confident for different people to be sent to different programs. But we're not really focused on that. And then we're focused on building people into leaders. We want other people to lead in this work, so we're training coaches in this and helping people catch up in the process and doing authentic work with them. And so we offer workshops and follow-up groups so people can continue it, because the most important thing after you go to a workshop or after you experience something is that movement, which is part of that integration. Like, how am I going to really show up to this?
Right. What do I do next?
And yeah, so this is my passion. Here I am today.
I see it.
And experiencing life as it comes to me. Life hasn't been treated me in the best way in terms of the struggles that I've had, but the unlimited me can never be taken away if I have the tools to access myself. That's what we teach.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So before we hopped on the recording part of this conversation, when we were sitting here, you had mentioned some discomfort with sharing your story. You had some reservations around it. So now you've done it. Can you share what the reservation was and how you feel about it now?
Whenever I put myself out there, and I could tell you, even when I'm about to run a workshop, it could be 50 people in front of me, and I've done it so many times. We've done over 50 workshops or sat, led, being part of, and I always get that nervous. It's like something's coming, and I don't know what it's going to be, and it's uncertain, and it feels like it's going to be big, and I just feel that anxiety.
Got it.
So,
but there was a specific thought, no?
And yeah, so like I'm afraid of how my story will be received. I'm afraid that, in a certain sense, like, who am I to even be saying this? Like, who wants to hear my story? It's almost like an egotistical thing to put myself out there and say, like, my story should be heard, my adventure, my journey. And I have a good friend that reminded me that the story that you have really needs to be heard, and that is a part of you. You should recognize that part of you and be aware of that, and comes from an insecure part of you.
The insecure part that doesn't think, that thinks your story is an inconvenience.
The ego part that wants to protect me, that feels threatened.
Right, that's the irony. The egotistical part is the one that doesn't want. Right.
The ego can show up in both forms. It can show up in humility, and it can show up in tremendous power.
Right.
It's just different forms. And the story needs to be heard. And I'm giving it out there because I want people to really know that there is possibility. There is places out there that you can go to get the work that you need to get done. And I'm telling you through my own experience. I'm not telling you because I've transformed so many people's lives, which we've been a part of, but really because I'm doing it myself. Right. I'm living. You're coming to my workshop to experience my journey, my path of what I believe to be a very effective path. Right.
I'm a big believer of that. I think that when I hear someone talking without their story, then I say, who the hell are you? And I don't mean it in a negative, like, who the hell are you? I mean, I want to know who you are. So who are you? You're telling me all this stuff. You tell me about breath work and family constellations and, awareness ideas and everything else. Great. But who are you? And then when you start talking about the struggle and being met with death and not feeling like you had a certain kind of support and being met with death again and again. And then it was very powerful for me when you shared about your what would you call him?
My son.
Not your son. The man who was married to your wife.
Oh, my wife's first husband.
Your wife's first husband, right? So I don't know. I don't even have a term for it, but it takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability and honesty to be able to talk about that, comfortably and gracefully. And I think that it's probably unique in some way, but not completely. People have stories. And I find that that's where the true connection happens. When someone hears a beautiful idea, it's like, okay, I can read 1 million books. But when someone hears a personal experience that's similar to theirs, then it's now, okay, now what does this guy have to tell me? I talk hours on the microphone, and I would say, I listen to your podcast and it's great and everything else. And what do they keep talking about? The fact that I watch porn. Why? Because they watch porn, right? Right. That's what they connect to. That the fact that this was a struggle that I had, that I shared honestly with, and they're possibly in a place now where they have a lot of shame around the same thing. They can't even imagine sharing honestly. And here's hear someone talking about it in a way that feels very relevant to them, to where their struggle is, then a connection is formed. And then the other things that I say that make me feel, better or worse or anything else more relevant is only important to them after they've created that connection. That's what I found. It's why I've been a big proponent of storytelling. It's where Mic Drop, the cult that I was a part of,
Yeah.
was started. I should say, for the record, on Mic Drop, because we got very, very heavy criticism, and the Rabbanim wrote a letter about us, forbidding people from coming to our event without even talking to us. This guy from Australia, called himself a therapist or a rabbi or both, had very strong opinions about our workbook and HIPAA laws and everything else, but never reached out to us to talk about what we're doing. And Shia Hecht is a hammer with who needs nails, apparently, and we were a cult too, and very, very aggressive in his style and approach. And I was on the other end of those things, and despite being on the other end of it and finding it somewhat unforgiving, and I didn't think many of them acted in a very classy way, I still at the end agreed with their conclusion.
It's just so interesting that you're saying that, because in the end of the day, if I embrace life as it happened to me, which is what life is really all about, I have to go back into the parts of me that are unresolved, that hold resentment, because I had a disappointment with Chabad, let's say. But really, I love Chabad.
Right.
And so I had to work through that in order to regain my connection back to Chabad and really appreciate the process. So what he was doing and what they were shutting down was forcing us into making the program
Even better.
Even better, exactly.
Right.
And I can appreciate that, and I really do appreciate where everything has come from and my connection to Chabad, and regain the strength and passion in it more than ever through removing those resentments and what I had to work through. Because in the end of the day, even though they shut it down, how did I show up on the other end? And acknowledging the fact that I was in a place of resentment, which means I have something to work through. Because people are going to show up. The circumstance is your wife's going to tell you to take out the garbage. People are going to shut down programs. People are going to knock you down. And who's showing up to that? And that's what I'm after. That's what we're always after. That's what our program is. And,
Right.
and what I preach is, who am I? Anochi. Who am I in all this?
Right. Exactly.
And if I can see myself, then I can take responsibility for my life. Then I can move into that life that I've always wanted, that I know I'm supposed to be the person I'm supposed to be.
Okay. I'm fairly sure if the rabbis grill you, you'll pass the test.
I hope so.
I'm not sure it's a good thing or not.
Yeah, I love Chabad.
No, it's great. Listen, I have a lot of I talk a lot about, religion and ideas I have that frustrated me, and my own journey. I've been very vocal about many aspects of it, but at the same point in time, it's over time I continuously come closer to Judaism, and a lot of what I learned growing up becomes relevant, and I appreciate it in a much deeper way as a result of being introduced to it at a young age. And while there are certain parts of it that I have very strong opinions on, it's not because I disagree with it. It's because I want to hold it to a higher standard. There's something very meaningful here that's being lost in a lot of ways, and I don't think it's necessary for people to go on this incredibly difficult journey to find the meaning in what was already there all along. I shared with Dan Brule when I was talking to him that I began to appreciate the rituals within Judaism from the rituals that I saw in ayahuasca ceremonies, and the sensitivity that certain shamans or others had for that space. I said, oh, that's why we do certain things the way we do it.
God reaches very far, all the way to the shamans.
Yeah, but it came back, and there's a new appreciation. And today
Sure.
A recurring theme, like a recurring mitzvah of mine that comes up in ceremonies and breathwork and repeatedly over and over, has been about Shabbos, right? Like you said about yours, tefillin, right? There's been this continuous connection and appreciation and a deepening there, that there's something very special for whatever reason about Shabbos for me. And there's a real ceremony, right? Shabbos, in terms of the way we dress, in terms of, the drinking, the eating, the prayer before, there's a lot that goes into it to create that sort of sacred ceremonial space. And for so many years, I looked at it as kind of, okay, a nuisance. Let's get to the food. I was like, no, like you want to get to the meat of this, there have to be certain things to connote a sacredness, an intention, an intentionality around this practice in order to create the feeling that we want. You know, one of the interesting things about Judaism is that if you talk about the two most observed holidays amongst the secular Jews, it's Passover, it's Pesach, and Yom Kippur, which are two of the more restrictive holidays, right? That have a lot of laws and a lot of very extreme. Don't eat, only eat this, you know, pray for 4 hours before you get to eat a bite of food. You know, the crackers, the cleaning, the matzah, it's very intense. And you'd think something like Purim or Hanukkah is much more festive and easy and light. But a lot of secular Jews don't get attached to it, which actually means it's not like a secular Jew or non-secular Jew. There's no such thing. It's, if you go back in any Jewish person's practice, 2 or 3 generations, there's going to be someone who grew up this way, who grew up from, because if it's not for a few generations, you know, we'll get lost. And that means it was practiced in such a way that the lasting impact that a child had, even if they left the rigid practice of it, was often in the most extreme of the holidays, often where there's a lot of ceremony and specificity and do's and don'ts. And as a child gets older, it's like, oh, the Passover Seder is important, Yom Kippur is important. Those become, you know, the big days that somehow get passed on to the kids. And the fun of Hanukkah and Pesach, I'm just using those as an example of Hanukkah and Purim. I mean, how many Jews know about Passover, don't know about Sukkot? Very interesting. Sukkot are much lighter, more festive, more, you know, chill day. Anyway, we've said a lot. I thank you for coming. I thank you very much for introducing me to Dan Brulé. I look forward to the breathwork, and I hope that from our conversation, many people reach out to you at Anochi and attend the workshops and experiencing the healing you have to offer.
And of just listening to this podcast, and they get to hear some of the stuff that we talked about, and gives them a certain idea of, I can take my life back and be more conscious, not necessarily about coming to our workshop, but doing something to go out there and bring more of the light of who you are into the world. And that's what I'm preaching. So
yeah,
thank you.
Liberation, same thing. I'm sure you know that Mayor Kay and I are doing our own workshop.
Yes.
Or so next week. Not a competition at all.
At all.
No, we have 11 spaces, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the best thing for a restaurant is for another good restaurant to open right next door, so that when someone 100%. Thinks about a restaurant, should I go? Oh, you know, this street, they have good restaurants. And once they get there, they'll choose which one. 100%. So it's kind of the same thing. Yeah. You know, we're not competing with each other. We're competing with the strip clubs. We're not competing with each other. We're competing with social media.
You have to acknowledge, again, you go back to acknowledge, why are you feeling the need to compete? What's inside you that's feeling threatened? And again, it gets you to go back and do those self-reflections. Like, always be aware of what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and how you're showing up to the world.
Right. I certainly don't feel like, I mean, I'm stepping into your space, so I don't feel that way at all. But in case you did.
We're good.
We're good. Fully supportive.
We're good, brother.
Of what you're doing. And I look forward to
thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining again. Thanks for the introduction to Dan Brulé, both for the podcast and in person. And I look forward to getting to know you better. Thank you so much.